All right, this is the B Block Podcast. I am Brandon Scott, your host. Appreciate you for being here. And it is official. Lamar Jackson is officially ruled out for the Ravens against the Texans, a battle between two 1-3 teams. And look, we knew Lamar Jackson was dealing with the hamstring injury because he wasn't able to finish the game against the Chiefs. And the first report that we got out there was that it'd be like a week to week type of thing. Then we get a contradictory report that says he's going to try to fight through it during the week and perhaps play on Sunday against the Texans. That always seemed far fetched. Just if you looked at the reporting, you could probably glean what direction or where the sourcing for these reports were coming from. Like the report of week to week was probably a team source, and the report of day to day, he's going to try to gut it out, was probably a player source. If I had to guess just from reading the tea leaves. But it always appeared that Lamar Jackson was going to miss this game against the Texans. And so, as we suspected, the Texans catch a break. Obviously, facing Lamar Jackson is different from, or facing Cooper Rush is a lot different from facing Lamar Jackson. And then to be fair, like Lamar Jackson would be different from any quarterback. That's not necessarily a shot at Cooper Rush as much as it is to point out the obvious that Lamar Jackson is a singular type of player. So the Texans catch a break there, and we're going to talk about that. Going to talk about the matchup between the Texans and the Ravens. But before we do that, I do want to tackle this Lamar Jackson injury and him being out for this game kind of from more of a Ravens perspective, just because, and obviously this is a Houston sports focused podcast. We cover the Texans here. We cover other Houston sports. But I really wanted to kind of key in on what's going on with the Ravens, because I feel like that's just a bigger national story than, let's say, just this single game, and certainly anything that the Texans got going on with them, with all due respect. But on this Jackson injury, it's like it comes at such a critical time for the Ravens. Like, the only reason why I felt like the Lamar Jackson might play Sunday narrative was worth even entertaining, as far-fetched as it seemed all the while. The only reason why I felt like it was worth entertaining was because of the level of desperation that the Baltimore Ravens have to be operating under. Like, I mentioned it, a battle between 1-3 teams. It's not like the Ravens are in a position to either just assume that they can beat the Texans without Lamar Jackson, or assume that even if they lose to the Texans without Lamar Jackson, that once he comes back, they can just start rattling off wins and turn things up at the end. They're not good enough to make any of those assumptions, and not just to necessarily say that they would, but they're not good enough to do that even if they wanted to. There is a certain level of desperation for the Ravens that says if Lamar Jackson can fight through it, then maybe he should actually try to fight through it and not take the Texans for granted in any way. So that's the only reason why I actually gave it a little bit of thought and kind of entertained it to any degree. But what it means, and look, the Texans are favored in this game. The money keeps going in the direction of the Texans as you see all of the injuries, and we'll talk about some of the injuries in a second that both the Texans and the Ravens are dealing with. But obviously the story there when it comes to the injury front is with Baltimore. But now you're talking about, okay, if they lose this game, they're already 1-3. They lose this game and start off 1-4 with the Rams around the corner before their bye week. Okay. Lose to the Texans, then you get the Rams the next week. There's no way you can feel confident about being the Rams. Even if Lamar comes back, you got to feel a little bit uneasy about the Rams if you lose to the Texans in any capacity, in any context, even without Lamar. Like, thinking about where your defense is. And that's the thing. You got Lamar injured. You're not making the most of Derrick Henry, and we'll see how things go in this game. your defense is Swiss cheese. And this is, again, I mentioned it being a critical point. Like, this was the year, like they're coming off of a really disappointing end to last season. We remember the issues with Mark Andrews, and it just, the way it ended against Buffalo. I mean, that was the reason why Ravens Buffalo to start the season was such a big game and such a big moment. Forget just the fact that they got MVP quarterbacks, but these are the two teams just played each other in the playoffs last year, but also feel like the two teams that most credibly threaten the Kansas City Chiefs AFC supremacy, right? Like, one of these two teams, it feels like, if not both of them or either of them, if they got the opportunity, but one of these two teams feels like they could dethrone the Chiefs. But the caveat is that they got to go through each other as well to get there. And so, which one of them is it going to be? Is it going to be Lamar Jackson's Ravens, or is it going to be Josh Allen's Buffalo Bills? And as we sit here right now, obviously the Bills won that game, won a really good close game against the Ravens to start the season. But as we sit here right now, those two teams have gone in the opposite direction when it comes to that narrative. And so when you consider the Lamar Jackson injury now on top of it, and when I talk about the timing, they were already dealing with serious questions before this injury bug hit, right? When you start talking about the guys that they're not going to have available to them on defense, it's a major blow. But they weren't playing well on defense to begin with, even when those guys were healthy. And so those were questions that were going to be asked and have to be answered, regardless of Lamar Jackson getting injured or all of these defensive guys getting injured. What about the fact that they're out there? The Ravens have one of the worst defenses in the league when they're talking about being a Super Bowl contender, a major issue. And so they lose this game. No Lamar Jackson, and they could lose this game, right? I'm Spoiler alert. We'll get to this by the end, but I am picking the Texans to win this game. The Ravens go down 1-4 with the Los Angeles Rams on the horizon. Now, to be fair, when they come back from the bye week, I'm looking at their schedule here, and they could definitely rattle off some wins, right? Like, they go Bears, Dolphins, Vikings, and that'd be a tricky one, but a winnable game certainly, even if it's on the road. Even though it's on the road, Bears, Dolphins, Vikings, Browns, Jets before they face the Bengals at the end of November. Those are five gettable games. Like, they could easily, I'm not gonna say easily, but they could definitely rattle off 5 wins after the bye week and start to be right back in this thing. And it doesn't have to be like the end of the world, but certainly this is what would get people to talking, right? And I think people are already talking about the issues that the Ravens have, both being one of the worst defenses in the league, if not the worst defense in the league, and the some confusing elements of their offense so far early on in the season. But they lose this game, and it's it's dire in Baltimore. Is the way I would describe it. So, major news there. Of course, it impacts the Texans. Now, as we talk about the Texans and try to break down this game, I do want to point out that I don't feel like, just because I obviously it's a plus for the Texans that they don't have to deal with Lamar Jackson. But I don't even think that the that's just the beginning of what they have to deal with, if that makes sense, right? To me, and I've made this point. I think I've been trying to make this point all week on the radio and elsewhere, but the thing that I've really been hung up on with this matchup is that it essentially comes down to a it essentially comes down to, if we simplify it, a not so good Houston offense going against an awful Baltimore defense, and then a really good Houston defense going up against a talented Baltimore offense, even without Lamar Jackson. So I asked this question: which of the bad is worse? and which of the good is better. That's what this is going to come down to. And I cannot escape, just because Lamar Jackson has been ruled out of this game officially and we know he won't play, I cannot escape the fact that the Texans defense still has to deal with the Ravens weapons. Like, never mind the fact that Cooper Rush is an obvious career backup and is not viewed to be like a difference maker on, for a team, especially against a defense of this caliber. Okay. And that is worth pointing out that the Texans defense is very, very good overall. But I feel like the Ravens' strength and the strengths, even with Lamar, with or without Lamar Jackson, I would say especially with Lamar Jackson, but even with him not being there or without him, I think their strengths go to or speak to some of the Texans' weaknesses, right? So I could certainly see the Texans having issues matching up with the Ravens tight ends or even some of the receivers or the running backs that might, try to get some action in the middle of the field. Like the Texans have struggled historically defending the middle of the field. The Texans have struggled certainly this year with tackling in the open field and in the run game, like just simple tackling. Like I've watched this defense enough, as good as it is, as talented as it is, and as productive as they have been overall. I have watched this defense miss tackles and get abused in the run game. And so if this is the same defense that the Bucks was able to run all over, and they don't have Derrick Henry, okay, and this Ravens offensive line is not very good, but I think they are better. They do better in the run game than they do necessarily with pass protection, and that I think deserves its own caveats because Lamar Jackson is a very specific guy to protect for, and trying to understand or predict whether he's safe or not, or whether he can get out of trouble or not, is a little bit more difficult, right? Because he's Lamar Jackson. But even with that, like the strength of what the Ravens do offensively directly goes at some of the things that I feel like the Texans defense has struggled with. And I can see the matchup or the matchup disadvantages or the mismatches with the Ravens tight ends and, let's say, either the Texans linebackers or safeties. I could see the matchup disadvantages for the Texans in the run game in trying to get Derrick Henry down. Okay. I could see Zay Flowers impacting this game a great deal. I could see Justice Hill impacting this game a great deal. And I don't feel like Cooper Rush has to be Aaron Rodgers to get this done. Like I feel like he's perfectly competent and able to get the ball to the Ravens weapons and allow them to do what they do, which I think could be dangerous, very much dangerous for the Texans. So I think that that's worth considering, even if you feel good about the Texans' chances in this game. Like and I made this point in the loop earlier in the day that with the Ravens' weapons, we don't often talk about the fact that you don't need necessarily a really good quarterback for them to be good. Like it's not the type of cast where it's the quarterback that's making all of these guys good and elevating all of these guys' game. Now, it certainly helps that their quarterback is Lamar Jackson. Certainly that would help, any team and anybody to play with a guy like that. But when we talk about their talent across the board, from Andrews to Flowers to obviously Derrick Henry, their whole cast of tight ends, honestly, to Bateman, and if I think I mentioned Flowers already, um, and of course they have DeAndre Hopkins. Like we've seen quarterbacks along the talent level of a Cooper Rush right here in Houston find a way to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins. Because how hard can it be if you just get the ball in the vicinity he got a pretty good chance of coming down with that thing. So we don't talk about with the Ravens weapons often about how singularly good they are and how good they could be even with a lesser quarterback, because they don't have a lesser quarterback. And so that conversation is not really most of the time worth having. It's a moot point if Lamar Jackson is out there to talk about how good these guys would be without an elite quarterback when they do in fact have Lamar Jackson. But in this case, I do think it's worth pointing out these are really good players. And if you don't muck it up, okay, don't go out there and try to play outside of yourself. If you're Cooper Rush, which I don't think he's going to do, I think there are some serious questions right now that the Ravens have since I did kind of open this thing from a Ravens perspective. I think they got some serious questions about their coaching and their play calling and like all of it. Like the or Zach Orr, their defensive coordinator. I know in Baltimore, there's a lot of conversation about him, and the players out there are defending him and saying that it's them that's not making the plays and it's not the scheme that's the problem. And I don't feel like they do a whole lot anyway. But that's sort of the narrative in Baltimore. And then on the offensive side, you had this weird situation this week of John Harbaugh seemingly throwing Todd Monken under the bus, and Todd Monken coming out and saying, "Hey, nah, it's cool. We've actually talked about this behind the scenes, so he's not saying anything to y'all that he hasn't said to my face." And I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but there is a little bit of angst on even the offensive play calling, despite the fact that the Ravens offense has been productive. Okay. The issue with them has been defensively. So yeah, no, I mean that's that they still have to deal with these weapons. I think the the question is more so what the like how the game plan actually plays out, and do they have coordinator issues, do they have coaching issues with, or so many questions around or on the defensive side for obvious reasons. And even with Monken, as they score a lot of points, this talk about, like, I'm sure y'all saw the Dan Orlovsky video that he put out there on social media about the Raven. This shocked him, it shocked me as I saw him and heard him speaking it, and I cannot really wrap my head around this idea, especially since they're losing, or maybe it's a good explanation, maybe not a causation, but more of a correlation with with them being a losing team right now. But the Ravens hand the ball off to their running back the least on the early downs, on first and second down of any team. Apparently, they give it to the running back the least, and the running back, by the way, again, is Derrick Henry. They give it to the running back the least of any team, but when they do, they are apparently second best at it. And so logic would dictate that maybe they should get a ball to Derrick Henry a little bit more on these earlier downs. Now, I think there are ways to explain how that is. Like, if it's the case that feel like they're finding themselves in shootouts, and certainly they've played some prolific, uh some I would say a couple of prolific teams, but really more so competent teams with a bad defense on the other side. So maybe they felt like they've had to either throw it, or you could even look at whether it's Lamar Jackson that accounts for some of their early runs. Okay. So that, like, there are reasons for impossible explanations. The fact that their defense is bad and that their quarterback is uniquely qualified to run the ball himself just as much as any running back is. So there is that, but that certainly would make you question the coaching, the strategy, the the game plan that the Ravens have. So I would actually look at that in terms of like what you could explore. Like, if they dare not make Derrick Henry a central theme in this game, um, I love that for the Texans. Love that for y'all, right? But the way I'm looking at it logically is that the Texans defense still has to deal with the Ravens weapons. We've seen them now. I think recently have some success against Derrick Henry, but I think more history has shown that they haven't, and that also Derrick Henry, despite some of his uh, fumbling issues this season, and despite the fact that he hasn't been utilized as much in recent games. We saw him in that first game. We saw him last season. Derrick Henry is still Derrick Henry, still fast, still big, still strong, still difficult to tackle. So they got to deal with that. Mark Andrews seems to be having a bounce back season from a really rough end to last season. He's a threat, a matchup issue for the Texans, whether that be a linebacker or a safety or whoever they try to cover Mark Andrews with. So they got to be real smart with that. It's a good cast of weapons that the Texans defense has to deal with. That being said, when we go to the other side of the ball and think about where this game could and should be swung, because let look at I'll say this: the Texans defense is at least good. Okay, the Ravens offense is, I think, at least good if it's run right. Okay, even if Lamar Jackson is not out there. On the other side here, it's the real pillow fight, the battle between two units that are objectively not good. That being the Texans offense and the Ravens defense. And so earlier when I mentioned which of the bad is worse, this is an interesting question to ask when you look at these two units. Because I would say healthy, you could argue that the Texans offense is worse than the Ravens defense. I think unhealthy as it is, I think the Ravens defense is worse. Like if these the backups to a bad defense, I think that they're worse than the Texans offense. But I would say even if you were to give the nod to the Ravens defense, bad on bad should be advantage offense. Now you could argue good on good could be the same thing, but I think it's more profound and more pronounced when we're talking bad on bad, because at the very least, the offense is in control. The offense knows, of course, the snap count, the play call, what exactly is coming, how the play is to be dictated. And I think this is a big criticism of the whole game plan offense type of mantra. It's like, nah, go in there with like your own intention and focused on yourselves and what it is that you do well. Force the issue and force them to react to you. And so with that in mind, like I feel like the the game plan should be to you know obviously, like, what do you do well? Offensive line is better and is better run blocking than they are necessarily in pass protection. You should run the football. You've learned now from your previous game that one of your rookies is a difference maker, and Woody Marks. Maybe you should give him the ball in a number of ways, that whether that's handing him the ball or involving him in your passing game. Obviously, you have Nico Collins, okay, and they got decent corners, but ain't none of them healthy. That being the Ravens, and I like Nico Collins against their corners anyway. You telling me it might be backups out there? Get the ball to Nico Collins. Spread the ball around. Get the ball to Christian Kirk. That's another thing. Christian Kirk has yet to really impact the offense in the ways that you expect that he can. He's really just getting his feet under him. I actually talked to Christian Kirk in the locker room the other day about exactly this. And his focus is like finding a way to help them get some explosive plays. Like they're not getting enough of them. And he is one of the guys that's proven enough and established enough to be somebody that they can rely on to do that for them. So lean into that. Like I don't feel like, for as cautious as I am assuming that the Texans defense is going to get off scot-free because Lamar Jackson is out there, or is not out there, I should say, with the offense, I feel like it's just absolutely no excuses against this Ravens defense to not perform, because the reality of it is the Ravens defense, as the Texans are going to see it on Sunday, is not as good as the one that they just faced against the Titans. And we saw what that looked like. Okay. Let's not pretend like just because they won 26-0 that it was some kind of like dominant, impressive offensive performance. It was rough. It was a struggle early in the game. The first half, 6-0. All you could get was field goals. Nick Caley talked to us about this week, about the big thing that they're focused on, and the thing that they need to improve on as an offense is finishing drives and not just settling for field goals, but actually being able to go out there and get touchdowns was such a relief. Y'all remember the relief that it was out there when C.J. Stroud checked into that play to Jaden Higgins and found him for that touchdown. It was like, oh, finally. Was that their first red zone touchdown? I don't know. Either way, it it was like it was a moment. It felt like a rare moment. Oh, a touchdown! The Texans scored a touchdown. Yo, look at that! But again, if you view the Titans game as a get right game or a get right opportunity for the Texans, if you viewed that as a get right opportunity for the Texans, especially for their offense, then there's no way you can't view the Ravens game as the same or similar. No way. I'm looking at it right here from the game notes that they send out, that the team send out. The Ravens defense is last in points allowed. So they give up the most points on average of any team so far in the league. Okay. The total defense is ranked. Okay. The total defense is ranked 31st. Their passing defense is ranked 31st. Their rushing defense is ranked 27th. Sacks, they're 30th in sacks. They do not get after the quarterback. If there's a, that's maybe the underrated part about this game, as we talk about the Texans offense not having any excuses against the Ravens. CJ Stroud should have time. CJ Stroud should be able to put his feet up. CJ Stroud want to do a spin move in the pocket, he should be able to do it. Because these guys don't get, I'm of course exaggerating there, but these guys do not get after the quarterback at all. I was listening to a little bit of Baltimore radio, and that was a complaint of the local guys out there of just how the pass rush for the Baltimore Ravens is non-existent. What good news. Hey, look, that's better news for the Texans than Lamar Jackson being out. Coming to find out that the Ravens can't get after the passer. And Lord knows that if it's anything the Texans have been trying to figure out for a couple of years now, is how to keep CJ Stroud upright, how to give him time, allow him to operate, allow him to be special, as we have seen he can be. These guys are 30th in sacks, tied for 30th in sacks. They don't get after the quarterback. They don't defend the pass. They don't defend the run. They allow more points than anybody. And so that should be advantage the team that's struggling 25th in offense, 23rd in passing offense and rushing offense, 29th in scoring. I think they were at one point, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering correctly, they were at one point the worst scoring offense in the league. And that was probably before, they go 26-0 against the Titans. But that only brought them up to 29th. What a gift for an offense that's trying to find its way and that has underperformed in the way that this one has. No excuses. When look at the Texans schedule and tell me when it is that they are going to see, other than perhaps the Titans. Maybe by the time they see the Jaguars and the Titans again, and they're going to do that back to back again, right? Later in the season. Maybe those two teams would be the candidates. But when can you guarantee me that they're going to see 32nd in points allowed? I understand it's a small sample size. It's only been a few games. It's only been 4 games for the numbers that we're talking about. 4 games into the season are the numbers that we're talking about for the Texans and the Ravens. Worst in the league in points allowed. Next to last in total defense. Next to last in passing defense. When are they going to get that opportunity again? They got to go get it. They absolutely got to go get it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this Texans offense looks like when they've got a little bit more confidence, a little bit more comfortability. We talked a lot this week at NRG whenever we went up there for media availability about the communication improving, the operation being a lot smoother, the collaboration that goes on between Kaylee and Stroud, learning each other and trying to see the game through the same lens, through the same eyes, the input that Kaylee is supposedly taking in from Stroud, Collins, Kirk, the veterans, the guys on the field, right? The guys with input, the coaching staff. Like, how does that all come together against a Ravens defense that has not found its way? I don't think they have any excuses in this game. So I am picking, and I mentioned this earlier, I am picking the Texans to win this game by a field goal. I think the score that I put in the Houston Chronicle, I just filed before I started recording this, a quick little graph and a score. That's what we do. Put this together with the sports staff at the Houston Chronicle. And I'm not on the sports staff, to be clear, but they were gracious enough to allow me to participate since I'm, in this space. And so I think the score that I gave them was 27-24, but I got the Texans winning by a field goal. And I feel like that's just me being more safe than sorry, because I feel like the Ravens are going to be able to score some on the Texans, but I see no reason why the Texans shouldn't be good for a few touchdowns, for at least 3 touchdowns in this game, or a couple of touchdowns, whatever, like multiple touchdowns in this game against a defense that's this bad. But I do think that the Ravens have enough offensively to keep it close. As good as the Texans defense is, like I mentioned earlier, they struggle with some of the things that the Ravens do well. And it's just, maybe for me, if I'm just being real about this, maybe it's just hard enough to imagine that we are here in this space where I could be picking the Texans to beat the Ravens on the road, that I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and pick a blowout or anything more than the 3 points that I went with. But I do feel good about their chances in this game, and I would say this, like, you talk about the significance of a win. If they were able to get this game, they're going into the bye week after this, right? Let me pull this up just so I can make sure that I talk about this properly. They're going into the bye week. The significance of a win will put them at 2-3 at the bye week, and it wouldn't exactly be like, the way they got here wouldn't exactly be how I predicted it. And even before the season, if you told me, hey, it's 2-3 at the bye week, how you feeling? Obviously, you wouldn't love that for like the odds to, to be under 500, to have lost more games than you won and all of that. But if you had told me how, and said, man, they lost them first 2 games against the Rams and the Bucks, worthy opponents. They handled business against the Jags and the Titans, not worthy opponents. and then they lost to the Ravens, which you could have predicted. They're 2-3 at the bye week. How you feeling? I'd have been cool with that. I'd have been cool with that. I wouldn't have predicted, and I would have said more so than just being cool with it. I should say, I should be clear about this. I would have found that to be believable and reasonable as a result for them. Losing the first 3 games, and especially I think the low point being that Jacksonville game on the road and the way it looked, and them just not feeling like they were getting any better. That I think gave a lot of us pause and opened up the possibility of them going 0-5, like in the mind, opened up the possibility of them going 0-5 into the bye week, right? Like as bad as the Titans were, and all of us picked them to beat the Titans. I went into that game saying, hey, I put a gun in my head, I'm picking the Texans, but I ain't feeling great about it per se. Like, I'm picking them, but it ain't really got nothing to do with them. It's more so the fact that the Titans just are that bad. And I just watched them and how they looked against the Colts. They just were that bad, and then they turned out to be maybe even worse than I thought. But it's not like I went into that game picking the Texans because I felt good about the Texans. It's not like I'm going into this game like, picking the Texans because I feel great about the Texans. It's all of this stuff that's happening around the Ravens, and all of a sudden them not looking like the Ravens that we were expecting them to look like. The reason why I feel like the Texans can win this game and will win this game. And so the significance of that, okay, if I can speak, the significance of that is, to me, just simply righting the ship and turning this thing into a reasonable outcome that you could have predicted at the beginning of the season, and coming back from the bye week with some tough opponents. You go Seattle, on the road to Seattle, at home against the Niners and Broncos, before you're at home again against the Jaguars. We get that Jacksonville, Tennessee back to back, right? So those first 3 games after the bye week are all, I think, reasonably tough games. Seahawks, Niners, Broncos. Going to the bye week 2-3 with that kind of, obviously they're week to week, but for us, kind of just looking at what's in front of you. Significant to not be 1-4, 0-5, and to be able to get that win against the Ravens. Like it basically rights the wrong, I mean, really, to break this down, simplify the whole thing without being too long-winded on it. It squares that loss to the Jaguars a couple of weeks ago. That's what it did. That's what it basically does. It rightens that wrong of losing to the Jaguars, especially the way you did, but losing to the Jaguars on the road and not getting either one of those first 2 games, obviously. But losing a game that you just should not have lost. If you're going to be a serious team, you can't be losing to the Jaguars. They're not a serious team. So losing that game, you rectify that by winning this game, and that's the significance of it. Go into the post bye week, or come out of the bye week with a relatively clean slate, kind of a new season, opportunity in front of you, kind of hoping that, best case scenario, not only do you win this game, but it's similar, maybe not the score, but like the improvement that you saw in the second half, right? The improvement that you saw from the offense in the second half that made you feel better about them, and allowed them to score touchdowns and to separate and blow out the Tennessee Titans. Like, if they're building on that and that carries over into this game, love where you're at the bye week, or certainly will take where you are at the bye week, because you lost to 2 worthy opponents, but beat the team that's dominated you for years now after what I would say is a letdown loss against an inferior team, or what should be an inferior team if you're a serious team. And I guess we still got time to sort of find out if they are in fact a serious team. We don't I don't think we know that for certain. I don't know if we're gonna definitely get that answer on Sunday against the Ravens, but certainly looking forward to the possibility of it. I think this is a big moment for the Ravens. Look, I'm obviously rooting for the Texans, but the Ravens got to win this game, man. What's interesting about all of it is that neither team, it feels like, can really afford to lose this game. The Texans, because when is an opportunity like this going to come in front of you again? And the Ravens, because they are running out of time to figure it out. These got to be two of the more disappointing teams in all of football right now. One that won its division and a playoff game in the Texans, and then with the Ravens, more specifically, a team that had serious Super Bowl aspirations. So something's got to give on Sunday. I'll be watching. I'm sure you will too. Make sure you come back to the B Block Podcast to catch us breaking it down. Break it down with us. Participate in the chat. Subscribe to the page. Check us out audio only. Rate and review. Tell your friends about the podcast. Do all of that. And until next time, be Scott, B Block Podcast, Foolish Club Media Production. Y'all be good.